Hello, everyone. We are Nsashaell System, and we are here to talk about some of our own personal experiences regarding our choice to become psychologists. Well, we like to spell it like the word psychologist, but then a parentheses, S parentheses, because at the end of the day, we're really only getting one degree. But because there's more than one of us, I guess we're just enjoying emphasizing that. First of all, I think we should probably do a few introductions. My name is Shawn, and I tend to be a fairly vocal member of our system. I'm also heavily involved in our graduate school experience, so I will be kind of facilitating this talk. Hello, my name is Allandra, and I am mostly running our actual clinical training. Hello, my name is Erif, and I am one of the leaders of our team of people who takes our classes. Hey, this is Faeris, and I am somebody who's kind of jumped from team to team occasionally during our various exploits in our PhD program. Yeah, I guess I like to talk, so so I'm here. Okay, thank you everybody for introducing yourselves today. So, just like some brief background about who we are as a system. We call ourselves Nsashaell System. Good luck spelling that. When we came up with the name, in our defense, we weren't really expecting to share our multiplicity with anyone. Yeah, that was 8 years ago or so, and our perspective has changed on that a lot. We have currently at the moment around 30 members. We do have effects from trauma. However, we do not believe that our trauma is the cause of our multiplicity. But just so you know, we do have trauma, but we also have not identified that as a cause of who we are. We do identify underneath the LGBTQ umbrella, and we also would qualify under the disability umbrella. However, we don't really subscribe to the term. And I suppose the other thing I should say is that we're from the United States. Aside from that, we're not going to say any other identifying information could be used to figure out our real world name, program, etc. Simply because we're not quite at the point where we're out as plural in our program, and we're still considering ways to approach that and whether or not that's something we even want to do while we're still in school. So, in order to protect our privacy, I'm not going to get any more specific. So, I suppose the focus of our session today is to talk about our experiences of going into psychology while being multiple, specifically being a closeted plural. So you may be wondering, why did we decide to go into psychology in the first place? One of those reasons is that we have accessed quite a bit of mental health care in the past. Various times we have really struggled, particularly with our trauma history, more so even than trying to figure out how to deal with each other and being multiple. We've had a lot of depression, anxiety, a lot of traumatic stress, and fairly serious mental health things that have made it really difficult or impossible for us to do our daily activities, go to work, have a job, things like that in the past. So we've accessed quite a bit of mental health care. At various times during that process, we were at various different places with our multiplicity and how we felt about it, how we conceptualized it. We've gone through a number of different frameworks when we've thought about it. There's been a real mix, I think, of how healthcare providers have responded and whether or not that's been helpful. I would say that the majority of the people who have attempted to help us without knowing that we were multiple were just unable to do much for us at all, because it's really an essential part of how we function and who we are and how we work. And if you don't know about it, it's really not possible to give us proper mental health care. We've tried hiding it before in order to access care without having the stigma attached to it, and it really hasn't worked. When we have been out as multiple to therapists, for the most part, it's backfired pretty horribly for us. So we're extremely familiar at this point with the theory behind dissociative identity disorder and the way people think about it in our field. And we've mainly just found that framework to not describe how we work really in any way, shape, or form. And we don't have the structure that's associated with being created with trauma. And so when people would try and treat us as though we fit the framework, they did a lot more harm than good with us. And that was very frustrating. So, one of the reasons we decided to go into psychology was because we would like to be a mental health care provider who can see things from the client's perspective more so than the perspective of the theories that we find personally to be deeply flawed surrounding the diagnosis of multiplicity as DID. So there was definitely that idea of trying to bring a new perspective in that will hopefully allow people who want to choose that perspective of care the freedom to get care that benefits them instead of being pigeonholed the way we were. Another reason why we decided to go into psychology is because we're just completely and utterly fascinated by people. And in order to be an effective clinician, I think you need to be extremely curious. Other members of my system have described us as incredibly nosy. So I think that's a good quality in someone who needs to get inside somebody's head, in order to help them from their own perspective, which is our kind of orientation that we're aiming for. And we just feel that studying people and their experiences and trying to help people through rough times, it really is a calling for us. It's not just a way to pay the bills. I have a number of reasons for going into the field, which is a good thing because it's been very stressful, very difficult. If you ask anybody who's gone through graduate school, really of any kind in any field, it's very, very difficult, a whole lot of work, a whole lot of mental and physical energy. Honestly, we're very proud of ourselves for the fact that we're about halfway through our program now and are still doing just fine. Faeris here, and I was going to talk about some of the advantages we feel like we have trying to tackle this enormously crazy task of doing graduate school, and how being multiple actually helps us a lot and makes things significantly easier for us in some ways. I think a lot of people go into psychology because they have struggled from mental health issues. I think it makes sense because, you're kind of like driven to help people with things that you've struggled with in the past, right? There was a time when we were in denial about being multiple. Nobody could really figure it out because of how well we were able to hide it. And it just became a thing where like no one really knew what to do with us. The other flip side of the coin, though, is that so there was a point when we realized we were plural and we started to identify as healthy multiple. And we started to look at our multiplicity as a positive thing and a strength and started to work together and try to basically like live our lives as multiple. And that's still the framework really that we use. Like we view our multiplicity as a positive thing. We don't believe ourselves to be disordered as far as our multiplicity goes. So, not believing your multiplicity is a problem is an interesting thing to go to therapy with, because then you're even more likely to be considered to be delusional. So, we had several therapists who would make a lot of assumptions about us, and particularly make the assumption that we were just wrong about being more than one actual person, and that we were actually parts of a person and we just needed to like face up to that. And they would like try to push their agenda, and it was honestly really damaging, because it's really triggering for us personally to like devalue our own existence in that particular way. Anyway, so we've accessed a lot of mental health care that really backfired and didn't do well for us, because they weren't open minded about the idea that it's okay to be how we are. That kind of stuff I think really helps us be better clinicians, because now when we have clients and they're really struggling to understand something, or like we think something might be going on but they disagree, like we're a lot more likely to be like, okay, we're going to take their point of view. We're not going to push our own agenda. And then also we're going to be really understanding when things are really hard, like to figure out or to understand or whatever, because we've been there. So that gives us a lot of I don't know. I think it gives us an advantage, you know. Another really important advantage that we have is the ability to see other people's perspectives, you know. Like when you're living with a bunch of other people in your head, and you have to coordinate like when you're out in the world and what you're doing and what your goals are and what things you're going to achieve by like what points in time, and like how you're going to do them, and just like the whole thing of like having to basically do every decision from a community standpoint. I think it really gives you an advantage as far as understanding the perspectives of other people who are not in your head, because you have to understand the perspectives of people who are in your head in order to do anything, like literally anything. Unless you want to be in a constant fight, it's like you have to be able to come to compromise and understand like where other people are coming from. And I think that doesn't just help us with clients, it also helps us just with the rest of our life too. I think we really have a solid advantage with understanding how other people, you know, the fact that other people think different things, and that they might be thinking in a totally different way than you, and they might care less about something than you care about and stuff. Like, those are things that a lot of people struggle with, and I don't think that's a problem that we have, because we live in a community the way that we do. So that's useful for psychology. Understanding people comes easier if you are willing to see something from their point of view and like can distance yourself from your own enough to do so. I think like the most practical strength that we have from being plural is the fact that we're not trying to do graduate school alone. I honestly don't know how singlets do what we're doing. I can't quite imagine it. So basically, what we do is kind of like a volunteer system of job assignment. And so people choose a team, and the teams include all kinds of aspects of our life. Basically, the teams, like your job is like going to be one of the list of things that has to happen. And then separately, we each get to divide up our free time. And so we both have a job and a free time, each of us, right? But it's important to understand, like, we aren't our jobs, right? We aren't like only the thing that we do for our work, quote unquote, right? Just like anybody else, we have kind of a life outside of that too. You know, it's temporary. It's like you basically commit for one semester if you possibly can. If something comes up and you're really struggling and you hate your job, then maybe someone will trade with you later, but you have to negotiate that, right? For the most part, we commit to a semester as whatever job. The jobs include things like, usually we'll take between 3 and 4 classes, and there will be between 1 and 3 people assigned to each class. So you can choose to be on one of the class teams. We also have a clinical training that we do. And so then there are usually 4 or 5 people assigned on that team, and they'll take care of seeing clients, going to meetings, doing supervision, doing our notes, things like that. Then, because work doesn't just mean work, it also means the things that people need to do every day. The other essential teams include things like taking care of the house and making sure that we eat enough, making sure that we get exercise, making sure that our pets are taken care of. Basically, like tending to our outside life is also incredibly important to do during the semester. There's also a team who does research for our program. And then sometimes, if our program has hired us to do something, then that will also constitute another team. Basically, everyone in the system chooses a team to be on. We sort of negotiate around until it's kind of even and it works. And then during the semester, you're only responsible for your job and then for advocating for yourself if you want some free time, because we have a small amount of free time. So you need to advocate, if you want it. It's basically a really nice system on the one hand because it means that everybody is basically focused on just their task and then taking care of themselves. But you're not focused on anyone else's task. So let's say somebody is on the class team and they have a presentation coming up and it's really stressful, but I'm on the clinician team, I don't care. You know what I mean? I support them and stuff, but I'm not worried about them doing the presentation because it's not my job. A not my job policy, basically, where it's you stick to what you're doing. And then, if you're worried about something someone else is doing, you can support them, you can talk to them about it or something, but we're not all worried about the entire whole picture at the same time. Which has advantages because the whole picture is usually extremely overwhelming. And I honestly do not know how singlets have that whole picture going and are able to not be completely neurotic at all times. I think it's incredibly awesome that I only have to focus on one job. And that, as long as we're communicating about time and everything, everyone's job is getting done and they're each independently responsible for each of their things. And it's everyone's motivated to do their one task. And so by the end of the semester, we've achieved obscenely large amounts of work. I think being able to divide up our work is one of our greatest strengths. And we can each pick something that we're good at already. And so at the end of the day, we're pretty good at everything that we're trying to do. Yeah, so basically, being multiple is a really huge advantage when it comes to something like graduate school where there's a whole bunch of tasks and they're all kind of competing for attention, because if each person individually advocates for their task, then nothing really gets left behind and nothing gets forgotten and everything gets accomplished. When this can go wrong is if there is something about the larger picture that's really important and people aren't communicating about it. I think the other thing too is the fact that everyone thinks their task is the most important task, and so because it's the most important to them. So you do end up in a situation sometimes where people are kind of competitive over their time or fighting over time to do their task, especially when there's not a lot of time available. So that can kind of cause conflict, can be kind of stressful. Honestly, I think one of the best things about being multiple through any kind of a stressful time is just the degree to which we support everybody in the system. We support each other so well and we care about each other, and it's being able to go in after you've done something really hard and there's around 30 people cheering for you in there. We know that we're supported at all times, no matter what's going on outside of our head, because everybody in there is just so caring and loving towards each other. It doesn't mean we don't fight, and it doesn't mean we don't have conflicts or we don't, we disagree on a lot. So, it's not about that, but at the end of the day, we support each other's efforts, and I think that really makes it possible to achieve great things. Okay, so this is Allandra, and I was going to talk about what it's like to be in hiding, essentially, as multiple in our situation. So we made the decision when we first started graduate school to be open about our LGBTQ status, but not about our multiplicity. we had a number of reasons for thinking that it's probably best that we hide our multiplicity from our program in general. So, like, one of the reasons why we don't really want to be open about it is that we're afraid of being stereotyped. Like people have mentioned before, we've had situations when we were in therapy and we were treated basically dehumanized as individuals. Basically, just a lot of really bad assumptions are placed on us sometimes when people, particularly in the field of mental health, believe that we have DID and that we're wrong about not being disordered and all that stuff. So, because we'd had that experience with therapists starting to assume large amounts of things that were wrong about us as soon as they found out there was more than one of us in our head, having had that experience, we basically decided we would not tell anybody about it until, at least until we had established ourselves as being competent, because that's the other thing that tends to be assumed. And we were worried that people might discount us. For example, if we had mentioned it in our application materials, never interview us, right? It basically coming down to us missing the possibility of us missing opportunities via other people's assumptions. Keeping it hidden has been pretty difficult to do because, as you may have noticed, we have fairly different voices. For a while, we were trying to all sound the same all the time, and that took up way too much energy. So nowadays, we just kind of dampen our mannerisms just a little bit when we're out. And that really makes it where people, for the most part, seem to assume that we're just a little bit eccentric because people tend to not, we found anyway, tend to not jump to the conclusion that you're multiple unless you tell that to them because it seems so outlandish, or like half of them don't even believe it's real, or, all the various like stigma around it, like, oh, like you wouldn't be in a program studying this and doing so well if you had like that serious quote unquote like an quote unquote illness or whatever. So because people don't see it automatically, it so far hasn't been just sort of randomly discovered by anyone. But we do dampen our mannerisms a little bit. We've had a couple of people who we've interacted with as professors or supervisors who we were a little bit concerned because of how perceptive they were towards body language, because it is a skill that you develop as a therapist. And obviously, we're studying under a whole lot of psychologists, and a lot of them have a really good sense of energy and of body language and things said between the lines. For example, we've had some professors who we were enough worried about it that we would only send the same fronter to their class whenever we took a class from them. Another reason why we're hiding our multiplicity is that we still have a lot of insecurity about other people knowing about it, because we've had a number of times we've tried to come out about it to other people and it hasn't really gone very well, partially because of all the stereotyping and like what little people know about it from the media. That's another reason why we haven't been out about it. Kind of just to protect ourselves, I guess, from having bad reactions to it. Like I said, there have been some situations where we really have needed to be careful about it. One of them is the fact that in our clinical training, we are filmed doing therapy sessions as part of our training. Before we're licensed, we have to have supervision from a licensed psychologist, which means that they will watch film of our therapy sessions and then give us feedback about it as part of our training, which, on a normal day is pretty nerve-wracking and nobody likes it. I mean, obviously, no one likes it. But we especially don't like it because we've gotten pretty worried about being noticed, because it's not just our voices that are pretty different from each other. It's also the way that we carry ourselves, the way that we move, things like that are pretty different. So when we first started doing our clinical training, we basically just assigned one person to be the main therapist, which was me. I stuck to that. I've stuck to that to this day, like, a year and a half into our clinical training. I have been doing almost every therapy session with our clients because we're a little bit worried about people noticing. Now, there have been times when other people in the system have kind of joined me or co-fronted with me and come in, and so far, nobody has noticed, and that seemed okay. So that might also be another over exaggerated fear that we have. But also, we don't really want our clients to notice because it's more important when we're with a client for us to be addressing their issues. We don't need to be getting derailed on anything about like some strange thing that we're doing that they don't understand or are confused by or whatever. Now, there may be a day when we're able to actually advertise the fact that we're plural because we do believe that it's a strength in our practice. But, that day is not now. All right, so this is Erif again. So, obviously, being multiple and entering the field of psychology means that we come up against a lot of pathologizing. And so I was going to talk a little bit about how we deal with that, how we cope with that in our coursework and our supervision and things like that. So I think one of our reservations about going into psychology to begin with is that most of it really does work from a medical model kind of a standpoint where there's kind of an average of normal, right? And if you don't fit that, then maybe you have some kind of a pathology or, there's something wrong, there's something that you need to address in order to become more normal. And like that's kind of like the whole field kind of centers on that, that idea of moving people towards more normal, like more normal behavior, more normal identity, more etc. I mean, to give psychology as a field some credit, people are trying really hard to incorporate diversity and the idea of diversity into their conceptualizations of everything. So it's a lot less like that, I think, that it used to be in the past. But the problem is that the whole premise of mental health care was kind of centered on that to begin with, and it's still to some degree centered on that. The way we look at it is that we would have a goal in our career of helping people to move towards where they want to go. Because for us, personal agency is incredibly important. If we hadn't had mental health care that centered that, it would be a lot harder for us to be where we're at now. And any of the healthcare we've had that has been centered towards making us more normal has been really damaging and not helped us at all. So I guess my point is we do grapple with a philosophical idea concerning, what our field is centered on, which is pathology. And we have had to figure out ways to kind of cope with that and figure out where we stand with it as we go through. Along with that, of course, there's a lot in psychology as a field that's extremely ableist, particularly older writings, some literature, a lot of old theories that are still in use now have the very ableist kind of a center to them. What I mean by that is that there's this idea that like people should be a certain way and they should be able to do, this, that, and the other specific thing. And if they aren't able to do that, then they need help to be fixed. Having it be at the center of essentially what we're doing can be a little bit difficult. But we just have to keep in mind what our personal goal is, which is to help our clients to get where they want to go. Because we don't really enjoy a pathologizing standpoint when it comes to mental illness, we find ourselves in situations a lot of times where we disagree with the course material. We find it at least a little bit obnoxious. We took an entire class on the DSM 5, which we obviously, just from a theoretical standpoint, don't like. But we had to learn all of the codes and all of the different diagnoses. There's a lot about it that goes against our values in one way, shape, or form. There are so many psychologists who are like that, and we're going to be joining them. Basically, the way we've dealt with the pathologizing is to miss class whenever something especially obnoxious is going to happen. For example, any class where we've talked about DID, we have left. We've left the room if it was short, and we have skipped class if it was not short. And I know that that sounds a little bit extreme, especially for people who tend to want to advocate for people like us. We just haven't felt comfortable confronting that in the current setting. And we find it difficult to imagine doing so without revealing our own experience, because we feel like our own experiences are really the most convincing argument that we have. Also, because we tend to be very stressed out during semesters and it tends to activate our post traumatic stress, staying out of especially difficult discussions has been a good way to keep our stress level down at least a little bit. It irks us a little bit to do that, to just leave instead of addressing it. But we just feel like the time hasn't quite come when we're ready to sit in a class and talk seriously about it. So we haven't really done that yet. So far, it hasn't caused issues with us, with any of our grades or anything, to miss 1 or 2 days of class here or there because of it. We do often encounter various points of view that are particularly irksome for us. For example, we've had it come up in several classes where we were supposed to learn about personality structure. Is definitely the kind of thing that is used in DID literature to argue for the idea that, for example, all multiples should integrate into one person, or people in a system aren't real people, they're parts of a person, and all of that kind of language that we really don't ascribe to and we don't like for ourselves. That whole framework really bothers us and makes us irritated, partially because of our experiences with therapists trying to use that on us when it wasn't appropriate and wasn't what we wanted to do. We've always wanted to work together and become better as a system. We're not interested in changing who we are as people. So whenever we encounter that, which we've encountered multiple times in our clinical work and also in classes, and whenever that happens, it's usually best to just muscle through it and try to put it out of mind as much as possible. The problem is that when you hear things like that too often, it can get in your head a little bit. So we have gone through phases in our training where we've ended up kind of pathologizing ourselves again, or looking at ourselves in ways that we found to be somewhat damaging, thinking about ourselves in terms of being disordered and things like that. And it comes and goes. It's been happening less and less as the years go on. I think we've gotten used to being exposed to that without taking in the viewpoint. I think another thing that we've struggled with is the fact that in our clinical work, we do have to diagnose people with things from the DSM-5. And so, despite our philosophical issues with it, because it's a requirement at the place we've been working, we've had to do that. And that's been quite uncomfortable for us too. So basically what happens if we start pathologizing ourselves too much, if we start, for example, if even like a few of us start thinking about our system as actually being one person, it sort of worms its way into the discussion in our brain, and then we start to worry about, whether or not we're perceiving things correctly or seeing things right, or know our own mind anymore or know what's happening. And then that kind of spirals into us not really communicating with each other. So our communication kind of falls off. Then once our communication falls off, our life starts to fall apart a little bit, because we have to be in constant contact about who's doing what and when, and what the day looks like, and who needs to get what done by what day, or else it doesn't happen. Anyway, when we start looking at it from that point of view, instead of our usual point of view of being a team, like a company who are working together with different departments, it really starts to impact our ability to do our work. We start struggling with sleeping, with eating enough, with, everybody's jobs start to become harder to do. And so over time, we've learned that really the best thing we can possibly do is try to guard against that pathologizing of who we are. Because at the end of the day, we really don't believe that there's anything wrong with us being multiple. Being multiple is just how we are, it's how we've always been, and it's how we're going to continue to be. And we're doing just fine. We are, after all, halfway through getting a PhD. And that's not an easy task for people who are singlets. So basically just constantly reminding ourselves of that and what we're capable of in order to counteract those things that kind of sneak in from our reading and from our work and from the environment that we're in is really very important for us. Okay, so thanks to everybody for talking about those various aspects. This is Shawn again. I'm back to kind of wrap us up and talk about some conclusions we've drawn from all of this. I think that the main takeaway that we really want people to get from this talk and hearing about our experience is that obviously it's possible to be multiple and to love being multiple and tackle something that most people would find to be a very difficult part of our career, and to do it with success and with hopefully some finesse of some kind, and basically that it's possible. Like we're so often told that it's not possible for people like us to do what ordinary people can do. And I think, honestly, we're doing some pretty extraordinary things, much less ordinary things, by taking on a PhD right now. And I think something that we've realized as we've gone along is that we love the challenge. I mean, going through this process, it's a challenge to growth too, because becoming a clinician means that you really have to examine yourself, in our case, ourselves, and we really have to grow as people as we're doing this. Otherwise, there's no way we can continue. It's like a forced growth process, and we've taken it on with enthusiasm, like we're just tackling it every time. And it's not really despite how hard it is, it's partially because of how hard it is that we enjoy it so much. It's kind of like the idea of not being afraid to take on challenges despite having things going on that most people can't even conceive of. About half of our system isn't really into psychology, and those are the people who generally take care of things at home or maintain relationships with friends or cook or, take care of our outside life in whatever way, drive us around, etc., as their jobs. But it's just amazing that all of them have also been so supportive of those of us who are just really devoted to this field. And basically, it's a hard time, but it's a really, really good time. And I think that we would just really love to continue to see people from a diversity of backgrounds and experiences going into the field of psychology, because we need people like that. You can't understand the human experience if you don't have people from every conceivable kind of experience trying to study that. And we're hoping that more plural people will go into psychology in the future, whether that's master's level therapists or people doing research, people becoming psychiatrists, people becoming psychologists. Like, the mental health field needs you if you are interested in it. We need to be the changes we want to see by delivering the services that people like us need to receive. So, one last thing that I would like to go into before we end here is sort of exploring for a minute how the field of psychology could make training more friendly for plural people or other people who are struggling with or just have diverse mental health experiences. So, I mean, generally, graduate school, especially PhD programs in psychology, are really rough on any student, whether or not they have outside mental health challenges that they generally have to deal with. I mean, fortunately, our program is at least a little bit better about this, but there are definitely some programs that we hear about where there's a culture where students have to pretend to be fine all of the time, even though that's really unreasonable to expect when you're under the sheer amount of pressure that people who are graduate students in psychology are under. Even people who don't really usually struggle with mental health end up struggling with mental health in graduate school just because there's so much to do and the demands are so strong. Yeah, so having that culture where nobody is willing to own up to their own mental health issues, I think is pretty detrimental because it makes everybody feel really alone. I think it's important for us all to be pretty open and honest about what we're dealing with, and what we bring to our programs and what kinds of past things we're trying to handle too. Well, some things that I think we would in general be pretty happy to see change on that front. It would be nice to see programs being more open about accepting students who have prior mental health challenges. Right now, it's really kind of a situation where you just don't really mention that in any of your application materials. Students are discouraged from saying anything about their own mental health challenges in any application materials, and it would be good if we could kind of go against that kind of a culture, of like we're going to accept that some people are coming in with this, but we're just not going to talk about it. To me, that kind of contributes to the stigma around mental health that people generally have. I think it would be good if programs could create an environment where difficulties are okay to talk about, and more importantly, that it's okay to seek help about it. I think one way to accomplish that would be to make it clear that your program is supportive of students who might be struggling and that those students won't be punished in some way or fined, that they have their opportunities limited or anything by sharing the difficulties that they're having or the things that they are going through. We talk a lot about self care in the field and how important it is to make sure that you're getting your own therapy if you need it, or, you're taking some time out for yourself and everything. And it's a little bit contradictory because at the same time as receiving all these pressures to perform, you're also receiving this message of, it's important to take care of your mental health. And those things really contradict each other. I think as far as being plural specific in suggestions, please don't joke about multiple personalities in the middle of classes or act like DID doesn't exist, because both of those things are pretty obnoxious and easily avoided. Like, you could not make the joke, you could do something else. It's a little bit shocking how often that tends to come up as like a funny side note because a lot of people don't really believe that it exists. But it's pretty hurtful when it's something that you personally have experienced or, a lot of people who have experienced. And it's also hurtful when it's a positive part of your identity to hear it made up into kind of a joke. This idea that DID isn't even a real thing, which is unfortunately a point of view that a lot of psychologists hold. Also, just to be respectful if you're creating or using DID related course materials, and also checking readings, especially older readings, for disrespectful references to DID. The challenge that we would like to present to the field of psychology is to figure out how to view plurality as an identity, a demographic, or a diversity label as opposed to a pathology. And that will be something that I think will take a long time to manifest, but that we really hope it can. So basically, to sum up that part, I think it would be good if students and faculty had more freedom to talk honestly about mental health experiences and challenges that we've personally had without feeling like it has to be silenced or shamed by the stigma of the whole thing that kind of permeates our field. I think that's pretty much all we have to say. Does everybody want to say thanks and bye? Yeah, thank you for listening to our session. Yeah, thank you for listening. Hopefully, you found this helpful in some way, shape, or form. Yeah, thanks. All right, this is Nsashaell System signing off.